To some of the headlines, this is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. Dozens of New York lawmakers and several advocacy groups are convening on Capitol Hill today to call on the Justice Department to investigate the New York City Police Department's controversial stop-and-frisk policies. Last year, the New York police officers stopped and interrogated people nearly 686,000 times. 9 out of 10 ultimately were not arrested or ticketed. According to the New York Civil Liberties Union, about 87% of those stops were black or Latino. In all, there were more stops of young African-American men than the total of population of that group in the city. Since Mayor Michael Bloomberg took office, the number of stop-and-frisks has increased by 600%, according to the New York Civil Liberties Union. While the city has defended the practice, opposition to stop-and-frisk is increasing. On Tuesday, a coalition of New York City politicians, civil rights leaders, gay rights activists, and union representatives gathered at the historic Stonewall Inn in Greenwich Village to call on the police to halt its practice of stopping and interrogating people on the basis of their identity. This is City Council Speaker Christine Quinn, followed by Kenneth Upton of Lambda Legal.
It's sending a message that our quest, all of us as New Yorkers, is to make this a city that is free and safe and embracing for everyone.
Stop and frisk and the racial profiling behind it is destroying the social fabric of this city. It leaves us unsafe, and it must stop.
To talk more about Stop and Frisk, we're joined by two guests. Ben Jealous is the president and CEO of NAACP. The NAACP is helping to organize a silent march against racial profiling in New York City on Father's Day, June 17th. And we're joined here in New York by Jamel Mims, an organizer with the Stop Mass Incarceration Network, which is working to end the practice of stop and frisk. He's been a victim of stop and frisk and has been arrested for nonviolently protesting the policy. We invited the New York Police Department to join us on the show, but received no response. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Ben Jealous, you're in Washington. Talk about what is happening in Washington today. Many people coming down from New York going to the Justice Department.
That's right. Folks will be here to meet with the CBC, the Congressional Black Caucus, and to meet with the U.S. And to meet with Holder and his staff. And the reason folks are here is, quite frankly, there needs to be a pattern and practice investigation into the cops. What's going on in the city is really wholesale racial profiling. We're seeing 700,000 people stop. 90% of them have done absolutely nothing wrong. Of that 10% who may have done something wrong, most of them get a ticket. About 1 out of 1,000 actually has a gun on them. 90% of the people are people of color, and the stops are so frequent. As Juan said, you actually have more stops of young black men than there are young black men in the entire city. And so, this is really the biggest, most aggressive racial profiling problem that we have in this country, and it just has to be stopped.
And Ben Jealous, in terms of what you're hoping to get out of the members of Congress, are there hearings scheduled, or and are you seeing this as New York representing something, a trend anywhere else in the country?
What is perhaps most disturbing is that the city has said that they need to do this. The mayor has said that his cops need to do this to make the city safer. And he's very proud of the fact that they have brought down violent crime by 29% in the past 10 years. What they aren't telling you is that a city like Los Angeles has brought down crime in that same time period, brought down violent crime in that same time period by 59% without this program. That Dallas has done so by 49%, Baltimore by 37%. So, yes, racial profiling is a big problem in this country, is various manifestations. It does happen sort of from coast to coast, but not like this. You don't see big cities like this doing this sort of old school, wholesale, jack them up on the street, racial profiling of young black folks in the same way in the biggest cities. Other big cities like Los Angeles simply moved beyond the practice since Rodney King. But, what's most disturbing is that, back in 1999, when so many of us went to jail in the wake of the shooting of Mr. Diallo, there were less than 100,000 stop and frisks per year in the city. Now that last year there was almost 700,000. This year we're on the pace to 800,000. It seems like New York has gone in absolutely the wrong direction. And relative to the other biggest cities in the country, has done the reverse of what they have done. And as a result, New York has actually done less to stem violent crime than its peers, like Los Angeles, which has, pushed down violent crime twice as far in the same period of time, because they have decided to use a tactic that builds walls. And so, what happens is you have people who are in the most victimized communities in the city who now fear talking to the cops because the cops are one of the gangs, that hurt them, one of the gangs that humiliate their children, one of the gangs that leave them in fear. That's not the way it should be.
Jamel Mims, talk about the organizing here in New York City and also what happened to you personally.
Okay. Well, here in New York City, and in fact, most recently, we have been in the midst of trials for being put on trial for crimes that we committed as far as standing in front of the 28th precinct and officially being charged with blocking pedestrian traffic and blocking the entrance to the precinct. But the reason that this is important and that this should be really brought out is part of the entire fight against stop and frisk. I mean, we see the climate around stop and frisk right now as politicians are lining up on the left and the right to either defend or rebuke the policy or ultimately make small reforms that keep this policy intact. On October 21st, when I joined Cornel West and Carl Dix to step out in answering their call to meet the stop and frisk policy with resistance and manifesting nonviolent civil disobedience. The purpose of that was to really raise the level of resistance. And we had seen that there was a lot of exposure done around stop and frisk. But the missing element of mass resistance is what was really missing. So we kicked that campaign off on October 21st. And just as recently as last month, we were put through 5 days of trial in an extremely an extremely secure setting where there were 2 security checkpoints. This was the biggest political trial in decades since the Chicago 7 in '79. And it's part of the ensemble of raising the level of resistance to this policy. Again, we're not talking about making reforms that leave this policy intact. In a similar the situation of the Freedom Riders is quite analogous to this. When the Freedom Riders were going down south or people were conducting sit-ins, they weren't looking for more seats at the table or more seats at the back of the bus or hours where they'd be able to visit. They were looking to end an entire system of oppression and brutality by looking at one specific facet and generating resistance around it. We have to look at stop and frisk through the same prism, and that's really what we've been doing most recently, and especially going into these trials that we'll have. That we had in April and that we'll continue to have throughout the summer in July and August.
We invited the New York Police Department to join us on the program, but didn't get a response. Last month, New York City Police Commissioner Ray Kelly defended stop and frisk when questioned by a reporter.
Although it is a tactic the police use, some people are just very hurt by it and upset when they're stopped unnecessarily.
Well, I understand that. Some people, you're taking away, at the very least, you're taking away people's time. So I understand people may not be happy with it, but I can also assure you that I go to communities of color, people want more. So absolutely, it is not a universal opinion in a lot of communities. So. And we've had meetings with community groups, and I have a lot of meetings with community groups. So it's not a universal reaction.
That was the Police Commissioner Ray Kelly. Jamel Mims, your response.
Okay, flat out, we are not dealing with a situation where this policy keeps the police from doing their job. In fact, we're looking at a policy that fits right into how the police broadly criminalize youth. We're in an emergency situation where the youth are broadly criminalized, marked deemed guilty before proven innocent if they survive long enough to prove they're innocent. With 2.4 million people behind bars and held and warehoused in torture-like conditions, and when people even get out of those conditions, they're discriminated against and relegated to second-class status for the rest of their lives. Now, we have to look at Stop and Frisk as a pipeline to that program, and the frontline policing and measures like Stop and Frisk and racial profiling as the method by which that entire process begins. So this really isn't a process that keeps streets safer. It doesn't have, it has no correlation to the rise or to the drop in crime rates, as statistics have shown. But we really need to broaden and change the terms of the conversation. This isn't about, again, this is not about criminals. This is about a generation that's been criminalized, targeted, and brutalized by the police.
Ben Jealous, I'd like to ask you about another aspect of the Stop and Frisk. Earlier this week, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo announced a new legislation to decriminalize public possession of small amounts of marijuana, lowering the penalty from a misdemeanor to a non-criminal offense. Misdemeanor marijuana arrests have skyrocketed in New York City in recent years, largely because of Stop and Frisk. Here's the governor speaking.
Young person has a small amount of marijuana in their pocket, and that's a violation. That's a fine. Police officer says, turn out your pockets, and now it's a crime. I mean, who could defend against that?
Your response to the governor's proposal?
Look, he is doing the right thing. And what's been happening in the city is that because you have this intense focus on young black and brown people, they have been busted at a much higher rate for something which is, frankly, a very common part of life in this country. 75% of grown-ups in our country have smoked pot at least once. And so when you do 90% of your stop and frisks on people of color in your city, what happens is that they get busted for what they have in their pockets much more frequently than white folks get busted for what they have in their pockets. And as a result, the penalty for a young person going through what for many has become a rite of passage becomes much higher, and can even lead to people being kicked out of public housing, not being able to get student loans or student grants that are guaranteed by the government because they have a drug offense, not being able to get hired for a job. You talk to some of these young folks, and they've been stopped 15 times, and you have to wonder. Somebody's going to hire them for their first job, and they pull up their rap sheet, which unfortunately is very common now. People are actually doing criminal background checks for the most menial of jobs, and they see that this person has never been convicted of anything, but they've had 15 run-ins with the cops. I mean, what would you think of that young person? And the reality is that what you should think, if they're coming from New York City, is that they've been repeatedly victimized by cops who seem to be, encouraged to do just that to young people of color. It really has to stop. I mean, we've got to get back. This is a city, by the way, which the last time that folks checked, because the city doesn't always report its homicide stats to the federal government as it should, the last time that folks checked was 2009. New York City was running about 10 percentage points below the national average for solving homicides. So in the country, you have about a 1 in 3 chance of getting away with murder, but in New York City, you had almost a 1 in 2 chance. So there are big jobs that the cops could be doing if they weren't throwing our young people up against the wall over and over and over again. They're doing 500,000 more stop and frisk than they were doing just 5-6 years ago, and they could take that 500,000 or that million hours and invest it into solving murders, invest it into solving rapes, invest it into doing their job, rather than building a wall between them and the people who, quite frankly, given the stats in our communities, most urgently need them to do a good job.
On Wednesday, the New York Civil Liberties Union unveiled a free smartphone app that allows New Yorkers to report stop and frisk encounters in real time, called Stop and Frisk Watch. The app enables users to easily record videos of police officers performing these stops and send the clips to the NYCLU. Jamel Mims, I wanted to ask you how activists are organizing against stop and frisk. But first, let's go to the clip of the video that explains how the NYCLU app is used.
The New York Civil Liberties Union's Stop and Frisk Watch is an easy way to record and report NYPD interactions with the public. Note, all footage and reports will be sent immediately to the NYCLU. The app has three main functions: record, listen, and report. Record allows you to videotape an incident, audio included. Stop recording by shaking your phone or manually pressing click to stop. As soon as filming ends, you will immediately get a brief survey. Please fill it out and share any pertinent information regarding the police interaction you saw.
Jamel Mims, will you be using this?
Well, I mean, I don't have an Android phone, so at the moment I won't be. But people have been engaging and activists have been engaging in this type of thing for a while. You know, there have been different cop watch services where people will record the interactions with the police with the people via their phones or cameras. But I would really like to stress or emphasize that this is a method where we can gather, an extreme number of, an extremely large amount of data and really start to characterize what's happening and put a face on exactly what's happening. But as far as a method and a tool of resistance and actually being able to overcome the situation that we find ourselves in via this tool set, I would really want to stress this relationship and the analogy to, the old Jim Crow and this being the new Jim Crow, and the prism by which we actually have to see resisting this, and it has to be met with, it has to be met with mass resistance and actually changing the terms of the conversation of the criminalization of the youth and mass incarceration in society. So while this is a much needed thing, and there are things that are doing this, the kind of critical leap, happens with resistance. There are organizations like the People's Neighborhood Patrols in Harlem, which you take a case like Oscar Grant, he was killed in front of hundreds of eyewitnesses who were using their cameras. The kind of critical step in what the People's Patrols do is actually, intervening and stopping those assaults.
You talked about Stop and Frisk as being the beginning of the pipeline into prison. And in your own experience, when you were stopped, you almost lost a Fulbright scholarship as a result of this. Explain what happened to you.
Yes, this was a few months after I graduated university at Boston College, and we had gone back to a party up in Boston, and we were down in like Tremont Street in the downtown district, coming out of this party at about 3 a.m. after the cops had broken it up. As they were escorting us down the street, and this is a mob of colorfully clad folk, exactly the type of folks that are in New York that are targeted by this policy every day. They start to corral us, grab us, and we see one of our friends being escorted with his hands behind his back and kind of paraded down the street. Another friend starts to take pictures of it, and as he, the cops immediately seize upon his camera, not wanting, any of that to get out. They toss his camera to me, and I grab it, and they then slam me to the ground. There were 5 of us who were kind of pulled out of the crowd, and as a result, I had to go and defend myself in front of the State Department. And in my Fulbright, my Fulbright grant, which I got for, which I received for a grant to study hip-hop in China, was threatened. It was a Fulbright that almost never happened. But this is an experience that, you multiply that experience by 1,900 times every day. And that'll really give us a true picture of the severe weight of the human rights crisis that we're in the midst of.
And when you talk about the need for more mass resistance, specifically, other than the patrols, what do you mean?
Well, you look at a case like Plessy versus Ferguson and Brown versus Board of Education, where you have the same 9 Supreme Court justices sitting on both of them. The thing that changed, the one that changed from segregation is illegal to segregation is legal, is public pressure. And so, I mean, manifesting mass resistance and people coming out and casting off this, the stigma and shame of having been criminalized and having gone to jail, and those stories coming out. I mean, mass resistance with things like the patrols. I mean, mass resistance with things like Cop Watch, and also in the legal front. As far as this class action lawsuit challenge to Stop and Frisk. but also more generally, just talking about engendering an atmosphere of resistance where people see this as an intolerable offense, where they see it go by and they see it happen every day, and people are, compelled to act, to put their humanity on the line, and to actually act to stop it.
I want to end by asking Ben Jealous two questions. One is about the history of silent marches, the one that will be held on Father's Day, NAACP, going back to, 1917, with W.E.B. Du Bois leading a silent march in New York against lynchings and segregation and other issues. And then also, if you could comment on the Florida Governor Rick Scott vowing to continue the purge of thousands of registered voters, despite the Justice Department intervening.
This country, sadly, in many ways, is starting out the 21st century in a place that is too similar in too many ways to how we started out the 20th. At the start of the 20th, we were dealing with a building confrontation against the old Jim Crow, racial segregation. Now, at the start of the 21st, we're starting with the building confrontation of the new Jim Crow, which is this mass incarceration, and it is at a very high rate in this country. A black man in this country right now is 5 times more likely to be incarcerated than a black man in South Africa at the height of that country's segregation, again, the late 1980s, for instance. And so we're calling for this silent march, much like we did in 1917. Then it was the St. Louis Massacre. And it was a national march to express outrage about the hunting of blacks in the streets and calling for an end to lynch mob justice in this country. This time it's about a massive problem of racial profiling, not in some far-off city, but right in Manhattan, right in the 5 boroughs, calling for an end to racial profiling across this country. Trayvon Martin's lawyer, Ben Crump, will be there. Trayvon Martin's father will be with us the day before. For obvious reasons, he wants to be back in Florida with family on Father's Day, but the day before for a town hall meeting. We're asking people to meet at 5th and 110th Street at 1. We will step off at 2. We march in silence to send a very powerful message. We want people, when they see the march, whether it's in person or on TV, to think about what's going on. If you chant, if you yell, if you scream, people think about what you're chanting or yelling or screaming. But when you're silent, they're forced to actually focus on, this massive social problem and really interrogate it for themselves. And we're asking people to think, because the mayor, again, has tried to convince people that this makes them safer, and it really doesn't, in very profound ways. We've seen young men like Ramali Graham, killed as a result of these stop and frisks. It's just a terrifying problem. With regards to Governor Scott,
and we have 10 seconds.
The reality is that we have Southern governors once again trying to steal our votes, trying to make it impossible for the people to actually choose who their president will be. The last time in Florida, they found it gets real messy if you break the law. This time they're trying to use the law. But now that they're finding out that there is a higher law, which is federal law in the U.S. Constitution, they're even willing to defy that. And when you get Southern governors seeking to defy the U.S. Justice Department to control the outcome of our country's politics, it is a very sad day.
Ben Jealous, I want to thank you for being with us, President and CEO of the NAACP, and Jamel Mims with the Stop Mass Incarceration Network, which is working to end the practice of stop and frisk. This is Democracy Now!, Democracy Now!